Beirut, Lebanon, 1979. The night sits warm over the coast, and the so-called wedding blends into the city's usual noise. Music rolls out across the courtyard of a villa facing the sea, and people laugh as if nothing in the world could touch them. White lights hang in long lines above the dancers and throw a soft glow on guests moving from table to table with glasses of champagne. The smell of jasmine mixes with the smoke from grilled lamb turning on metal racks. Kids weave between chairs, shouting and grabbing pieces of Lebanese sweets piled high on trays. A few old men lean together over their nargile, pulling slow breaths and murmuring about politics, each convinced the others are wrong. Women in sharp dresses trade quiet comments about romances, betrayals, and the steady tensions inside Beirut's Palestinian expatriate circle. No one there pays much attention to the photographers drifting through the crowd with a pricey Nikon pressed to their faces. No one wonders why the catering team showed up early that afternoon with covered dishes and boxes of French wine that looked too fine for an ordinary celebration. And no one looks twice at the young couple that arrived from Paris, claiming to be distant relations of the groom. They smile, raise glasses, and say they are thrilled to be part of the family, even though they have never met the bride. What none of the guests understand is simple. There is no bride. There is no groom. The pair standing at the center of the party are Mossad operatives playing their roles with steady nerves. The man taking photos is a Sayeret Matkal commando trained to fight in tight spaces where seconds decide who stays alive. The caterers fussing over trays are part of Caesarea, the assassination unit known inside Mossad for operating with quiet precision. Every detail around them, the decorations, the guest list, the menu, the music, has been shaped over 8 months of planning. All of it leads toward one goal. They are here to kill Ali Hassan Salame, the man Israeli intelligence holds responsible for the Munich Olympics attack and a long list of other strikes that left Israeli civilians and soldiers dead. This whole event exists for that single point. What later becomes known as a hidden chapter of Operation Spring of Youth's forgotten sequel stands as one of the most daring missions in Mossad's history. Veterans who worked in its shadows still speak about it with a mix of pride, unease, and disbelief. The operation shows how intelligence services can turn something as harmless as a wedding into a lethal environment, how operatives slip into second lives so smoothly that their target can stand beside them, smiling, only moments before dying. It also shows how the machinery of an assassination can hide inside one of the most familiar human rituals.
To understand why Mossad built an entire fake celebration just to take down one man, you need to know who Ali Hassan Salame was and why Israeli intelligence viewed him as a threat worth huge operational risks. Salame was born in 1940 in Kula, near Jaffa, back when the area was under British Mandate control. His father, Hassan Salame, carried a heavy legacy in Palestinian resistance circles. He had been a commander during the Arab Revolt of 1936 to 1939, fighting British rule and rising Jewish immigration. During those years, he worked with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and built a reputation for sharp tactics and a willingness to face danger head-on. When the 1948 Arab-Israeli War broke out, Hassan led irregular Palestinian fighters against Jewish settlements and the young Israeli military forces that were forming at the time. He was killed in June 1948 in the fighting near Ras Al-Ain, and his death quickly turned him into a figure people spoke of for years as a symbol of Palestinian loss and defiance. Ali grew up with that story hanging over him. After the Israeli victory in 1948, his mother took the family to refugee camps in Lebanon, where they tried to rebuild some kind of life. The crowded shelters, the lack of steady income, and the way people kept repeating tales of his father's courage pushed Ali into an identity he never had much room to question. From the time he was a boy, relatives and neighbors told him he was meant to take up the same fight, to answer what had been taken from their family, and to help carry forward the hope of returning to the land they had left behind. Still, Ali was more than the hardship around him. He had a sharp mind, a calm presence, and a natural way of getting people to follow him. These traits set him apart from the many young Palestinians who joined armed groups during the 1960s. When he went to Cairo for university, he studied engineering and absorbed the ideas spreading through Egypt during Nasser's pan-Arab push. He mastered Arabic, English, and French, and seemed able to shift easily between life in the camps and the more polished circles of Arab elites. His ability to plan, read situations, and handle people earned the attention of senior Fatah figures. By the late 1960s, Yasser Arafat brought Salame into Force 17, an elite unit that protected PLO leaders and carried out major operations against Israeli and Western targets. His climb through the ranks was fast. By 1970, he was running the unit's operational arm and had become the main point of contact between the PLO and left-wing groups in Europe. He arranged safe houses, supplied weapons, and handled logistics for attacks aimed at Israeli targets outside the Middle East.
He could move through European cities without drawing notice, give orders for killings when needed, and keep secrets in an environment where Israeli intelligence had deeply infiltrated Palestinian networks. Israeli services first marked Salame as a key threat in 1971 after they picked up communications pointing to his role in planning attacks on El aircraft and Israeli diplomatic sites in Europe. But everything changed on September 5, 1972. Black September members entered the Israeli Olympic team's rooms in Munich and took 11 athletes and coaches hostage. By the end of the standoff, all 11 Israelis were dead, either in the first attack or during the failed German rescue attempt at First Feltenbruck Air Base. The Munich killings shook Israel. The images of masked men on the Olympic Village balconies, the chaotic German response aired live, and the final deaths of the athletes triggered national anger and a demand for action. Salame, already seen as dangerous, now became Mossad's top target. Prime Minister Goldmeier approved Operation Wrath of God as a long-term effort to track down and eliminate everyone tied in any way to planning or carrying out the Munich attack. Mossad built a detailed roster of targets, gathered photos, personal histories, travel habits, and any small clue that could help, then sent teams across Europe and the Middle East. At the top of the list stood Ali Hassan Salame. Israeli intelligence, relying on intercepted messages and reports from captured members of different cells, believed he had acted as the main operational figure who signed off on the Munich plot, handled the money, arranged safe houses and transport, and stayed in touch with the Black September unit that executed the assault. Historians still argue about how much of this was true. Some records point to a limited role, suggesting he knew the attack was coming but did not run it in detail. Still, Mossad in 1972 treated its assessment as final. Salame was held responsible and would be pursued until he was dead. The first attempt to kill him unfolded in July 1973 in the Norwegian town of Lillehammer. Mossad teams believed they had traced him to a quiet part of the town, a place of small homes and calm streets. On the night of July 21st, a group followed a man who stepped out of a cinema with his pregnant wife. They approached him, opened fire several times, and left him dying on the street while his wife watched in shock. The team escaped, convinced they had struck down Israel's top target. They had not. The man was Ahmed Bouchiki, a Moroccan waiter with no tie to the PLO, no role in militancy, and no knowledge of any clandestine activity. The operation turned into a major intelligence blunder, the product of hurried observation, weak confirmation of identity, and pressure from political leadership eager to show progress.
Norwegian authorities detained 6 Mossad members within days. 5 received convictions and prison terms, though those terms ended early and the individuals were released without fanfare. The keys strained Israel's ties with Norway and other European governments, revealed parts of Mossad's tradecraft, and pushed Israel to halt similar missions in Europe for a period. For Salame, the Lillehammer incident served as a clear message. He realized Mossad would not stop looking for him, that every mistake in security could cost him his life, and that he had to stay alert at all times. He shifted constantly between Beirut, Damascus, and several European cities. He changed his appearance again and again, adopted new names, carried forged passports, and kept bodyguards from 417 who were considered the most reliable men around him. He avoided routines, stayed in one place only briefly, and relied on intermediaries to pass messages so no direct line could be traced back to him. Still, Salame had a personal flaw that Israeli intelligence studied carefully and later used against him. He liked comfort, attention, and the status that came with a lavish lifestyle, and that desire made him visible in ways he tried to avoid. A business meeting felt too stiff and made it easy for him to show up with bodyguards without anyone raising an eyebrow. A wedding, though, opened a different set of possibilities. In Lebanese and Palestinian traditions, weddings are community affairs that pull in whole networks of relatives, neighbors, and longtime acquaintances. Invitations move through word of mouth, not strict guest lists, and anyone linked to either family is expected to appear. The mood is festive, people let their guard down, and even cautious figures tend to blend into the crowd. Salame, with his social ambitions and his marriage to Georgina, would almost certainly attend if someone he trusted passed along an invitation or if the families involved had enough status to make his presence worthwhile in political terms. The real obstacle was building a wedding so convincing that Salame would accept the invitation without a trace of doubt. Mossad's Caesarea unit took charge of the whole setup. Caesarea handled overseas assassination missions, drawing operatives from top military units and giving them years of extra training in surveillance, covert communication, weapons handling, and the kind of mental conditioning that allowed them to operate under false identities and carry out killings with cold precision. The unit's commander in 1978, whose identity is still secret, pulled together a team of 12 operatives for what would turn into one of the most intricate deception missions ever attempted. The first major task was creating a believable history. They could not just announce a wedding out of nowhere.
It needed to sit naturally inside Beirut's Palestinian social circles, tied to relationships that seemed to exist long before the supposed event. Mossad located the Khalil family, a Palestinian household well known in Beirut's expatriate scene. The father had been a successful merchant before 1948, had rebuilt his business in Lebanon, and kept ties with both the PLO and influential Lebanese Christian figures. The family had enough recognition to lend credibility, yet was not so prominent that everyone knew intimate details about each relative. Israeli intelligence then fabricated the identity of a Khalil's son, said to be living in Paris and engaged to a Lebanese woman from a respected family. The invented biography was detailed. He had studied architecture in France, worked for a firm designing commercial properties, and planned to return to Beirut to marry his fiancée in a celebration joining two well-positioned families. Operatives posing as family acquaintances began dropping mentions of the upcoming wedding in casual conversations at cafes, during social visits, and in business discussions where Palestinians shared community updates. The remarks were light and unforced, meant to make the wedding feel like part of the social landscape without drawing heavy scrutiny. At the same time, Mossad built the bride's identity with the same level of care. Layla Haddad was presented as the daughter of a Lebanese Christian family with business interests in Beirut and Cyprus, giving the story another layer of legitimacy and ensuring the fictional union fits smoothly into the region's social expectations. Her father, according to the backstory, had built his wealth through importing European merchandise and kept ties with Palestinians who had found success after being displaced. The Haddad family was designed to appear reputable but not so high-profile that their absence from official Lebanese social listings would raise questions. Agents created a full set of supporting documents: birth certificates, school records, property deeds, bank accounts, all convincing enough to survive a quick check by anyone Salame might send to verify the wedding. The entire operation stretched over 8 months.
Mossad couldn't just announce a wedding and expect Salame to show up. The engagement had to develop naturally, referenced in casual conversations, woven into Beirut's social scene until it felt real. Operatives pretending to be friends of the groom from Paris arrived in Beirut months in advance, attending parties, forming business ties, and casually dropping mentions of the upcoming marriage. They rented an apartment in a trendy neighborhood, establishing themselves as affluent Palestinians with European polish, and gradually built relationships with people in Salame's circle who could eventually extend an invitation. Choosing the venue was crucial.
It needed to match the family's supposed status, but not be so exclusive that Salame would feel out of place or that security would be too tight. Mossad settled on a seaside villa in Beirut's Ramlet al-Beida district, renting through intermediaries who claimed to represent families living abroad. The villa provided operational benefits. It was private enough to control who entered, large enough for a realistically sized wedding, and positioned near escape routes the agents could use after the assassination. As the date drew near, invitations were sent through social networks. They were printed on fine cardstock with elegant calligraphy announcing the marriage of Michel Khalil and Layla Haddad, set for Saturday, January 20th, 1979. Operatives posing as family friends delivered the invitations in person, making sure they reached people in Salame's circle who would either mention it to him or, if convinced of his interest, invite him directly. Salame got his invitation from a Lebanese businessman familiar with both the supposed Khalil family and Salame himself. Unaware that the wedding was a setup or that he was being used by Israeli intelligence, the businessman casually mentioned the upcoming celebration at a dinner, noting the prominence of the groom's family and the attendance of several Palestinian leaders and Lebanese politicians. Salame showed interest and began considering attending. In the months leading up to the event, the false engagement was mentioned repeatedly in social settings, becoming part of Beirut's everyday chatter. The groom's supposed friends from Paris mingled with key figures in Salame's circle, sharing stories about the couple and their families, further lending credibility. Every detail was carefully orchestrated. The apartment they rented reflected a lifestyle of wealth and sophistication, the business connections reinforced their social legitimacy, and their casual mentions of wedding plans slowly normalized the idea of the celebration. By the time the invitation circulated, the story had been thoroughly embedded in the local social fabric, making the wedding appear entirely genuine. Salame's curiosity and interest were now natural responses triggered by a network of social cues that had been meticulously constructed over months of preparation.
By the wedding day, the Haddad family, their network, and the venue had all been transformed into a believable social reality. The months of groundwork ensured that Salame's presence at the celebration was a natural consequence of the story Mossad had built. A story that seemed unremarkable yet irresistible to someone in his position, grounded in social connections, personal curiosity, and the subtle pressure of expectation. He liked attending these events, and being there reinforced his position as a Palestinian leader accepted in Beirut's most elite social circles. In the weeks leading up to the operation, Mossad finalized every operational detail. The plan was for the assassination to take place during the wedding reception, after enough time had passed for Salame to feel comfortable and let his guard down, but before the evening ended and people started leaving. The method chosen was poison, slipped into the champagne that Salame would drink during a toast. The substance selected was a modified form of ricin, picked for its dependability and the fact that its symptoms could easily be mistaken for a heart attack or severe allergic reaction, giving the agents enough time to leave before anyone realized an assassination had occurred. The operatives assigned as the bride and groom went through intense preparation.
They studied Lebanese wedding traditions, practiced customary dances, and rehearsed conversations about their fictional romance and families until the details came naturally. The woman playing Ela was a veteran from Caesarea who spoke fluent Arabic and French, had lived undercover in Arab countries for years, and had the social skills to convincingly portray a Lebanese woman from a respectable family. The man playing Michel had similar experience, with training in maintaining his cover under pressure and the psychological strength to act out a joyful wedding while knowing he would be involved in killing a man within hours. Other operatives took roles as guests, photographers, musicians, and catering staff. Each had tasks beyond their cover. The photographer's job was to confirm Salame's identity through close observation and alert the other agents when he was in position. The caterers handled the poisoned champagne, making sure it reached Salame during the toast while preventing anyone else from drinking it. Musicians created background noise and distractions to cover any unexpected issues. Operatives mingling among the crowd watched Salame's bodyguards, ready to act if any became suspicious. On the evening of January 20th, 1979, the villa became an authentic-looking Lebanese wedding. White lights and flowers decorated the courtyard. Tables were set up in the traditional way, with a head table for the families of the bride and groom. A band played Arabic music blended with Western pop. Catering staff moved seamlessly between kitchen and courtyard, serving appetizers and pouring wine.
The bride wore a white lace dress, elegant but understated. The groom had on a tailored suit. Everything looked exactly as it should for a wedding celebrating the union of two prominent families. Guests began arriving at 7 in the evening, most of them operatives or local contacts who had been recruited without knowing the event's true purpose. As the night progressed, the atmosphere was lively, filled with laughter, dancing, and conversation. The couple performed traditional dances with practiced grace, and the operatives monitored Salame closely, ensuring he followed the expected routine. Champagne glasses were filled, conversations flowed naturally, and the timing of the critical toast was approached carefully. Every movement, every smile, and every gesture was coordinated with precision to avoid suspicion. The villa buzzed with the energy of a real celebration, masking the deadly plan behind the polished surface of joy and elegance. Every agent knew their role, and every detail, from the position of the guests to the sequence of the music, was designed to make the operation seamless and leave no trace of its lethal intent. Some of the attendees were actual Lebanese citizens who had received invitations and believed they were attending a genuine wedding. Mossad had carefully planned to mix real guests with agents, knowing this would make the event seem more authentic. The presence of genuine guests created unpredictable interactions and conversations, adding a layer of realism that staged actors alone could not produce. Their spontaneous behavior gave the celebration a natural flow, making the operatives' actions less noticeable. Salame arrived at 8:15 in the evening, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. He wore a finely tailored suit and carried himself with the assured presence of someone used to high-profile social settings. The businessman who had invited him greeted him warmly, leading him through clusters of guests toward the courtyard where the bride and groom were welcoming newcomers. Salame offered congratulations to the couple, embraced Michel, and kissed Ela's hand with a practiced European formality. He spoke briefly with Michel about Paris and about Palestinian life in France, showing a polished international awareness that fit his image. Meanwhile, the Mossad operatives acting as bride and groom maintained flawless composure,
Ela laughed at Salame's compliments and thanked him for attending, while Michelle discussed Palestinian political matters with the easy authority of someone whose family was respected in the community. Neither displayed any sign of nervousness or strain. They had prepared for this night for months, rehearsing until their roles felt second nature. And for them, their cover identities now seemed more real than their actual lives. For the next 2 hours, the wedding followed the familiar rhythms of a Lebanese celebration. Guests ate, drank, and mingled freely.
A live band played music that drew people onto the dance floor, while children ran between tables and adults exchanged updates on business and politics. Salame grew visibly more relaxed, drinking wine and speaking with several attendees about the ongoing civil war in Lebanon and Palestinian relationships with different Lebanese factions. His bodyguards stayed alert at the edges of the courtyard, scanning for potential threats from outside rather than from anyone inside the gathering. A photographer, an operative from the Sirit Matkal unit carrying a legitimate Nikon camera, moved among the crowd taking pictures. He focused on the bride and groom, groups of guests, and candid moments, all of which would later be destroyed but were immediately useful for operational purposes. He approached Salame and asked to take a photo. Salame consented, posing with the businessman who had invited him. The photographer captured multiple shots that verified Salame's identity by closely noting facial features and particular scars previously documented by Israeli intelligence. He sent a discreet signal to other operatives. The target was confirmed, and the next phase could proceed. At 10:30, the groom's father, played by an operative who had thoroughly studied the Khalil family history, rose to deliver a toast. The room quieted as he spoke, his voice carrying the practiced warmth and authority of a man familiar with public appearances. Guests listened attentively, some nodding, others exchanging quiet smiles, while the Mossad operatives continued their roles seamlessly, blending into the event as if they had always belonged. The celebration carried on with all the natural unpredictability of a real wedding, yet every detail was carefully orchestrated to serve the mission's objectives. He thanked everyone for coming, speaking with deep emotion about his son's wedding and the survival of Palestinian families despite years of displacement. He urged the crowd to raise their glasses in celebration. Waiters moved among the guests in the courtyard, handing out flutes of champagne. One operative, in charge of the poisoned glass, made sure Salame received a specific flute marked with a tiny scratch on its base, nearly invisible, setting it apart from the rest. Salame lifted his glass along with the others. As the toast continued, the groom's father shared words of hope for Palestine's future, praising the strength of the Palestinian people and emphasizing the need to preserve culture and traditions, even while living in exile. His speech struck a chord with the audience, many of whom had endured similar experiences of displacement and loss. Salame smiled and nodded, quietly agreeing with the ideas expressed, which echoed his own convictions about Palestinian nationalism and the ongoing struggle for return. The toast concluded with a customary Arabic blessing, and the guests drank together.
Salame emptied his glass, as tradition dictated, and the poison began entering his system immediately, absorbed through the lining of his stomach, targeting his cardiovascular and nervous systems. The compound had been designed to act within 15 to 20 minutes, producing effects that would mimic either sudden cardiac arrest or a severe allergic reaction. For the next 12 minutes, there appeared to be nothing unusual. Salame moved among the guests, accepting congratulations about his own marriage to Georgina, chatting about possible business deals with a Lebanese merchant, and laughing at jokes told by the groom. Operatives kept a careful watch, blending in while monitoring for the initial signs that the poison was taking effect. At 10:47, Salame paused in mid-conversation. He pressed a hand to his chest, his relaxed demeanor giving way to confusion. He tried to continue speaking, but his words came out slurred. His complexion turned pale, and he stumbled slightly, reaching for a chair to steady himself. His bodyguards immediately approached, recognizing that something was seriously wrong, though they did not yet grasp what was happening. The host who had invited Salame asked if he was okay. Salame attempted to reply, but collapsed before forming a full sentence. His bodyguards caught him, gently lowering him to the ground. Chaos erupted across the courtyard as guests realized something had gone terribly wrong. Someone called for an ambulance. Women screamed, and children began to cry. The musicians abruptly stopped playing. Among the catering staff, a Mossad operative with medical training moved quickly, presenting herself as a nurse. She knelt beside Salame, checking his pulse and breathing, giving the impression of performing emergency care. In reality, she was confirming that the poison was functioning as intended and that Salame was entering cardiac arrest. His pulse felt faint and irregular, his breathing shallow and strained. His eyes wandered, unfocused, and his body twitched slightly. The bodyguards demanded someone call an ambulance right away. A few guests ran toward the villa doors, searching for phones. The bride and groom stayed near the head table, their faces a mix of shock and concern. Around Salame, guests clustered, some weeping quietly, others murmuring prayers in Arabic. In moments, the courtyard shifted from celebration to utter chaos. The operative pretending to be a nurse carried on, performing fake CPR while making sure no real aid reached Salame. She glanced at the bodyguards after about 2 minutes and shook her head, signaling that he was unresponsive. One bodyguard screamed, a mix of frustration and grief, demanding to know what had happened. He insisted that Salame had been fine only moments before. By 10:53, exactly 18 minutes after drinking the poisoned champagne, Hassan Salame was dead. His heart had stopped, his breathing ended, and his body lay still.
The operative checked for signs of life one last time and announced him dead, her tone steady despite the surrounding panic. The bodyguards reacted with rage, drawing their weapons and refusing to let anyone leave until police arrived and investigated their commander's death. Mossad operatives stayed calm, keeping their composure perfectly as the situation grew tense. The bride broke down, tears streaming as she sank into her groom's arms. Michelle held her close, speaking quietly while scanning the courtyard carefully. Other operatives acted surprised and confused, asking questions a normal guest might ask, maintaining their covers even as the risk of exposure grew. Lebanese police and ambulances arrived about 12 minutes later. The bodyguards recounted the sudden collapse and death of Salame, insisting it was an assassination, though they had no explanation of who or how, since the incident had occurred at a wedding full of people with no clear motive. Officers questioned witnesses, recorded statements from the bride and groom, and examined the area for signs of foul play. The preliminary medical assessment suggested a cardiac arrest or a possible allergic reaction to something Salame had ingested. Police collected food and drink samples for testing, including the champagne glass he had used, which the operative had carefully preserved as evidence. The glass would later undergo analysis, but the specific toxin would not be immediately identified. By the time forensic pathologists confirmed poison, the wedding guests would have dispersed, and the operatives would be gone. The bride and groom were questioned thoroughly, describing the moments before and after Salame collapsed, their statements recorded in detail as investigators pieced together the scene. Meanwhile, the courtyard remained marked by the sudden turn from celebration to tragedy, a memory of chaos frozen in time. They showed shock and grief that such a disaster had struck during their celebration, claiming full willingness to cooperate with authorities and giving contact details that looked real, though they ultimately led nowhere. They spent the night in a hotel, keeping up appearances as a newly married couple
shaken by the sudden death of a prominent guest at their wedding. The next morning, they left Beirut on a flight to Paris, citing the need to recover from the trauma, and returned to Michel's apartment in France. Other operatives left separately over the next 2 days, using different routes and false papers. By the time Lebanese investigators began suspecting that Salame's death was not a natural event, but a carefully planned assassination, every Mossad agent involved had already exited the country. The investigation quickly lost momentum. Forensic tests showed that Salame had been poisoned, but pinpointing the exact substance proved difficult because it broke down rapidly in his body.
Witnesses recounted the wedding and Salame's sudden collapse, but no one noticed anything unusual. The bride and groom could not be traced in Paris. The villa where the wedding had taken place had been rented through middlemen who turned out to be fictitious. Invitations and decorations had been paid for in cash, leaving no financial trail. Lebanese police concluded that a highly elaborate assassination had taken place, but could not identify who was behind it or how the operation had been executed with such precision. Israeli intelligence never officially admitted involvement. Government representatives responded with standard statements, refusing to comment on intelligence matters. Within days, however, Israeli media began reporting that Mossad had finally eliminated the man responsible for Munich, describing the operation as a brilliant exercise in deception that showcased the global reach and skill of Israeli intelligence. The point was clear. Israel could strike its enemies anywhere, using methods so advanced that even extensive security measures could not protect Palestinian militant groups. Salame's death hit hard. He had been a magnetic leader, an experienced operational commander, and a symbol of Palestinian resistance to Israeli military power. His assassination sent a warning that no Palestinian leader, no matter their precautions or location, was safe. The psychological effect went far beyond the loss of a single commander. It stirred fear and suspicion within Palestinian organizations, weakening trust, making leaders wary of gatherings, new contacts, or any situation that might be a cover for Israeli operations. The fake wedding became a story that circulated in intelligence circles worldwide, remembered as a masterful example of planning, deception, and precision. It demonstrated how far-reaching and methodical covert operations could be, leaving a lasting impression on anyone studying the dynamics of international intelligence work. The operation's ripple effects lingered for years. Leaders learned to scrutinize every invitation, every gesture of friendliness, knowing that a casual event could hide lethal intent. Agents debated the precision of the poisoning, the logistics of multiple exits, and the careful use of false identities. Even routine intelligence trainings began to include references to the Salame case, teaching operatives how a seemingly normal event could conceal a deadly mission. Beyond the technical details, the case served as a chilling lesson in psychological warfare. It was not only about eliminating a target, but also about spreading fear and doubt across an entire network. Mossad had not just removed a leader, it had shaken the confidence of an entire movement. Over time, analysts compared the fake wedding operation to other international missions, noting its meticulous preparation, flawless execution, and the way it exploited both human trust and bureaucratic gaps.
The story of the wedding, the hotel, the flight to Paris, the villa rented under false names, and the untraceable cash payments became almost mythical. Within intelligence communities, it was discussed as a blueprint for precision, illustrating how operations could be invisible until the effect became undeniable. Every small step had been calculated to leave no trace while maximizing psychological impact. Even decades later, the Salame assassination was cited in studies of covert operations as an example of how planning, patience, and misdirection could achieve results that brute force alone never could.
The operation showed how detailed social engineering could bypass even strong physical security, how careful planning could lure targets into traps, and how well-trained operatives could stay undercover during extremely complex missions, even going so far as to stage a complete wedding. Intelligence agencies around the world studied the mission closely, dissecting its methods and debating whether similar strategies could be applied to their own objectives. Yet the mission also brought up deep ethical dilemmas that are still discussed in intelligence circles. Was the intricate deception warranted because of Salame's role in terrorism? Could the potential harm to innocent guests ever justify such an approach? What toll did living under a completely fabricated identity take on the operatives, forced to act out a joyful wedding while simultaneously planning murder? Answers largely depended on perspective. Israeli officials treated the operation as a legitimate strike against a terrorist who had killed civilians. Many Palestinian supporters, however, considered it state-sanctioned terror, proof that Israel would violate any boundary, even the sanctity of a wedding, to reach its targets. Those who carried out the mission returned to Israel regarded as heroes in the secretive world of Mossad. They earned commendations, promotions, and recognition from top political and military figures who understood both the complexity and the strategic impact of the operation. Still, they bore lasting psychological scars. Pretending to be a bride and groom, celebrating with apparent joy while fully aware their goal was murder, demanded intense mental compartmentalization, leaving long-term effects. Intelligence experts note that deep cover missions often cause identity confusion, trouble maintaining real relationships, and higher risks of depression and substance abuse among operatives who spend months or even years inhabiting alternate lives. The woman who played Layla Haddad later recounted her experience in classified debriefings. She described the surreal sensation of dancing at a wedding that was entirely staged, exchanging vows that had no meaning, smiling at guests, and all the while witnessing a man die from poison she helped deliver. She stressed that while her training had prepared her for the operational tasks, it had not prepared her for the emotional aftermath. Dreams in which the fake wedding felt real, and the death of Salame turned from a professional success into a source of guilt. The psychological evaluations noted that she had difficulty forming close relationships afterward, struggling to trust anyone with her true identity after months of living convincingly as someone else. Ali Hassan Salame's death did not stop Palestinian terrorism, nor did it bring resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. New figures quickly stepped into leadership roles, continuing the cycle of violence and resistance. The mission remained a subject of analysis for intelligence professionals, both for its operational brilliance and its heavy human cost. The story of the operatives highlights the extreme demands of espionage work, where mastery of deception, patience, and psychological endurance can achieve strategic objectives, but at the expense of the operative's own mental and emotional well-being. Hamas and other groups kept targeting Israeli civilians and military forces. The cycle of violence that had claimed Salame's father in 1948 carried on across generations, producing fresh martyrs and new fighters motivated by revenge. Yet the fake wedding operation succeeded in its immediate goal, removing a high-value target directly involved in attacks that had killed Israelis, and sending a signal that Israeli intelligence would relentlessly pursue its enemies, using patient planning and sophisticated techniques that made protection nearly impossible. The impact of the operation went beyond the immediate kill. It created a model for social engineering in intelligence, showing that carefully constructed false scenarios could bypass security systems that stopped traditional assassination attempts. Agencies around the world studied the mission, weaving its lessons into training and operational planning. The idea of staging entire social events to reach a target
became part of the spycraft toolkit, later adapted for operations against terrorist leaders, weapons traffickers, and foreign intelligence officers who had learned to evade standard surveillance or direct approaches. Even 45 years later, most details of the fake wedding remain classified. The names of the operatives, the specific techniques for creating fake identities, and the intelligence confirming Salame's presence are all protected. Still, the general story has entered intelligence lore, taught in courses as an example of careful operational planning, and studied by historians to understand how modern intelligence carries out covert actions in hostile environments. The operation also exposes a moral tension in intelligence work. The people behind it were not villains. They were highly trained professionals serving a democratic nation under real terrorist threats.
They believed the mission was justified, that Salame deserved to die for killing Israeli civilians, and that their unconventional methods were less ethically troubling than mass bombing or full-scale invasions that would have killed many more people. But carrying out the operation required them to deceive innocent guests, celebrate a fake wedding while planning a murder, and manipulate deeply ingrained human traditions for deadly purposes, violating the very meaning of the ceremonies they mimicked. This moral complexity is central to modern intelligence. Operatives operate in spaces where normal ethical rules are blurred, where national security legitimizes actions that would otherwise be crimes, and where the state's power allows lethal decisions based on evidence that cannot be publicly shared. The fake wedding shows how intelligence work often exists in shades of gray, balancing strategic necessity against human and moral costs, and forcing professionals to operate in a realm where ethical certainty is impossible. Mossad's staged wedding was at once an extraordinary display of professional skill and a striking breach of social norms that keep communal gatherings safe from conflict. Both views are correct, and the contrast between them highlights a key truth about how states carry out secret operations in the name of security they see as critical. The man cast as Michel Khalil, the groom in the ruse, had never been married in real life. Years later, after his death from cancer and the eventual declassification of his role, family members reflected on how deeply the mission had left its mark on him. When he attended his sister's actual wedding many years afterward, he found himself unable to engage with the event emotionally. Instead of celebrating, he observed, measured, and analyzed, looking at security risks, noticing weaknesses, and imagining how a similar operation might be orchestrated. The staged wedding had taken a part of him, turning his natural ability to experience joy into a lens of strategic thinking he could not switch off. His sister recalled him standing by himself during her reception, eyes scanning the room, his expression distant and detached, as if he could no longer accept that any celebration could simply be a celebration. The memory lingered with her, a man present in body, but locked away in thought, forever marked by the mission that had demanded he perform life's most personal rituals as if they were exercises in tactical precision. The contrast between the artificial ceremony and the real one underscored the emotional toll of covert work, showing how an assignment meant to protect lives could quietly consume the humanity of the person carrying it out. Over time, relatives came to understand that he had not lost interest in family or love, but that his experiences had altered his perception, creating a barrier between him and the everyday moments that most people took for granted. Every toast, every laugh, and every embrace at that wedding was filtered through years of professional habit, turning ordinary joy into something he could only examine, never fully join. It was as if the mission had rewired him, blending the memory of a false celebration with an ongoing awareness of potential threats and operational outcomes, a mental layering that neither time nor affection could fully erase. Even when surrounded by people who loved him, he remained partly elsewhere, a man shaped by secrecy, strategy, and the enduring echoes of a performance that had demanded more than just acting. It had required a piece of his very self.